the fact is there was this mental push about being more efficient and controlling cost, that the safety and the quality kind of not intentionally, but was not the focus on people's minds. Focus was meeting their turnover time targets and getting these things. So stopping and making sure that we're doing the right person, the right time, was a culture change to put that back in, to kind of push back a little bit and say, hey, we might have gone too far in the efficiencies. Let's come back a bit.
Clock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line. You're listening to First Case, a perioperative podcast bringing you exciting interviews, engaging discussions, and innovative solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. Each episode, we talk to frontline staff, perioperative leadership, and nursing entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, we tackle the real-life issues affecting the OR. Whether you're tuning in for surgical service education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And now it's time to roll back and start the first case.
On this week's episode of First Case, we are speaking with Bill Duffy, the director for the Nursing and Healthcare Administration program at Niehoff School of Nursing at Loyola University in Chicago. And Bill is also a former AORN president and also known as the father of the timeout. And Chris, I love storytelling and I love hearing how people changed things. So I'm super excited to get to hear Bill's story and see how he helped bring about a timeout.
He is really one person that had an idea that changed an institution, not just in the U.S., but across the entire world. And just hearing how that was able to go from a thought to practice is really inspiring.
All right, stay tuned. We'll be right back with Bill Duffy.
Hi, I'm Chris Blevins.
And I'm Melanie Perry.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to First Case.
Joining us now is Bill Duffy, director for the Nursing and Healthcare Administration program at Niehoff School of Nursing at Loyola University in Chicago. And he's also a former AORN president from 2004-2005. Bill, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, no, I'm excited to be here. This will be my first podcast, so I always like to do something new.
Oh, well, I'm so glad that we got to be your first podcast, and I'm super excited to have this conversation with you today. But everyone might not know who you are. So would you go ahead first and just share a little bit of your background with us?
Oh, well, I'm glad you did that, because I was going to do the Steve Martin line, about I was born a poor child. Yeah, so my background, so I'm a nurse. I spent most of my career in the operating room. When I was ready to go on to get my advanced training, I was trying to think of what I wanted to do. And so everybody at that time, this is back in the late 80s, was all the nurses who were moving up or going to get their MBA. And I really wasn't interested in doing what everybody else does. Clearly, I was a male who became a nurse. But then other people were going to get their MSN, and I was really kind of thinking my nursing skills are pretty good. So the one thing that I really didn't understand about was policy and legal risk. I would be at meetings and people would say, hey, we can't do that. We're going to get sued. And I'm like, well, how did you know that? Did I go out drinking one night in school and miss
Did I miss
class?
that lecture?
Yeah, then I missed the class about telling about how we're going to get sued. So anyway, I decided to go to law school. And so I went to law school and I learned two things. One, that most healthcare providers know nothing about the law and how it works. And I actually have spent much of my professional career talking and lecturing about how to understand how the legal process works. But the other thing I learned, and it was also driven into me in my nursing school, about the power of nurses to advocate and to make changes. And the law is all about advocacy. And so I was able to merge what I learned in law school with what I learned in nursing school to try to use my voice to help improve care. And so I started getting involved in ARN. I worked my way up to national president. And then when I was president, there was an opportunity I saw where we could make a difference. And so I advocated for that. And that's kind of where Time Out came from.
I know. I'm so excited. I know that you giggle a little bit when I mention you as being called the father of the timeout, but that is something that you were known for. And your presidency with AORN is marked by that advocacy and that change. So why don't you tell us the story? How did that happen?
Yeah. So great question. So back in the day, as they say, for all those of us with white hair, back in the day, the Joint Commission in the early 2000s came out with a list of never events, things that aren't supposed to happen in hospitals. And if you look at the list, it's like, oh yeah, sure, that's a pretty good thing not to have them, they have on this. But they didn't say how to not do it. They were just saying hospitals should stop doing this. And one of those events was wrong-sided surgery. Like we were, have this tendency to sometimes do the surgery on the wrong body part or the wrong patient. And so the Joint Commission said, don't do it. And so all the hospitals started doing their own thing. Some people were saying, put a mark on the leg not to do surgery. Others were saying, put the mark on the leg to do surgery on. And as we know, for those of us in healthcare, doctors and nurses move around between hospitals, and it was very confusing because hospitals had different policies. And so there was no standard, and we kept making that mistake. And so when I was elected president, in this policy, in this advocacy background that I had, I said to my board, why don't we as the nurses, why don't we say the way it should be? I mean, the nurses are the number one healthcare provider. We own the operating room environment, and we should kind of just set a standard way to do this.
How did that go, by the way? Like asking your board, getting buy-in for such a huge undertaking. I run a national committee as well, and just trying to get buy-in from a lot of people who are leaders in their field can be a really difficult step. How did that process go?
Well, it's not as easy as I'm going to make it sound, but I really had a good board who had a vision that would kind of, I think maybe my passion and my energy influenced them a little bit. There was a lot of concerns because first we had to create something. We didn't have anything, so we're like, how are we going to do that? And we had a plan for that, and I'll get into that in a second. And then we had to market it, and so we actually took 25% of our reserves to create a marketing campaign, and to get the board to not knock off, take out 25% of your reserves out of the bank. So anyway, what we did is I said to him, why don't we get the members involved, obviously? And so we had a committee put together, and we reached out to Lucian Lieb, who was at that time a physician at the Harvard School of Public Health. And he was an expert in patient safety. And we said, hey, we have this idea. Will you help us? And he said, like most everybody says, oh, I love nurses. I'll work with you guys. And so we created this toolkit, this timeout toolkit. And then, after we got it done, we decided to mail the toolkit to every member in every hospital in the United States.
Before we get to that, though, I really am curious about the process because, as you said earlier, everyone is well-intentioned and every facility thinks that what they're doing is best practice for the patient. How did you come to these are the main items that we need in a timeout? How do you get all of those great ideas and then meld them into that one toolkit to even be able to send out?
Yeah, well, I would have to say, the sausage making of that, that happened in the committee really,
I love that term.
really was, more about there were great ideas, but there was the willingness and these are nursing leaders and, leaders in the sense of leaders about advancing the profession, they weren't all directors of nursing. There were staff nurses and directors and other people. And Dr. Lieb, who was a resource that people look to as kind of like a good moderator, to influence the process and to help us form consensus. So there was just a lot of, kind of me and the board keeping the committee with their eye on the prize. Dr. Lieb, who was helping us look at best practices and saying, how could this work in your environment, and helping us kind of come to where we needed to go. We all kind of knew where we needed to go, but as you said, people were intentioned, and obviously there was regional and other differences. But the thing that was kept driving home is that if we don't do this, somebody else will. And if we want to make sure it's done right, then we got to form consensus. So
how are you able to get that buy-in, to get that consensus? What did you do?
Well, so how do you know? Like, I don't know if they ever asked, if this is a silly analogy, but if they ever asked Babe Ruth, how did you hit that home run?
Right.
What I'll just say is, during my presidency, when at my Congress, we were debating some practice issues, and people were again getting up and saying we couldn't do this. And a member stood up and said, for the whole year, Bill Duffy has been telling us what we can do. Why don't we start thinking about what we can do as opposed to what we can't do? And then the discussion changed, and we passed whatever motion that we were going to pass. People were doing that. And so I just think that the fact of having somebody who can help people see the potential, and that's part of advocacy. We want to help our patients see what their future is going to be, how they're going to recover from this disease, how they're going to manage it. The same thing we can do that in policy as well. If we can help people see the future and to buy into it, then all the whisperings in the ear and all the, what about this and what about that, we can manage that, because there is. If your team believes in something, we can accomplish anything we put our minds to.
Well, and we talk a lot about precedent. I think, as far as medicine goes, especially in surgery, it changes and grows and evolves. Our approaches, the instruments we use, all of that changes every year. But we tend to be such creatures of habit which is, it's juxtaposition of that. But I wonder how you set the precedent. Especially, and that with the legal terms. I have a degree in criminal justice. I never use it, but I do love that avenue. But everybody wants somebody else to be the first. And was it a legal action that started, that really enforced the timeout being something used consistently and now mandated? Or was it just well-intentioned people that wanted to think outside the box?
Well, I think it was a little bit of both, because but I'll say that the smartest thing we did was, once we got the toolkit developed, then, of course, again, one of the things I learned at Lusk is you only get anywhere with coalitions, so we went out and built a coalition. So we went out to the American College of Surgeons, we went out to the Surgical Technology Society, we went out to the CRNAs, we went out to the physician's assistants, we went out to the Anesthesia Society, and we said, hey, we got this idea, and we would like you to sign on to it. And then we also went to the American Hospital Association, and we went to the Joint Commission, and we said, hey, we took this idea, you said to do this, we have this plan, will you support us in saying that this is a plan that we can invest in, so that you would have your surveyors be looking at for this as well, to say how you're doing it. So once we got the various organizations to sign on, some were easier than others, but once we got the various organizations to sign on, then all of a sudden we're talking now, it's just this is a nurse's idea. This is the perioperative environment's idea. And it really kind of, I think, changed the dynamic of how it was able to be implemented in hospitals, because it wasn't just ARN saying to do this. We were talking when the nurses in the hospitals who made this happen, the members who made this happen in the hospital setting, were able to say to the surgeons, the American College of Surgeons is signed off on this. So the Orthopedic Society is signed off, or to the anesthesiologist, your organization is signed off. So now they won't say, oh, we're fighting the nurse's idea. Now you're saying, why are you bucking your own organization? So I think that was one of the key things is that we were willing to give credit of this idea to every organization. And by doing that, we were able to make the change happen. Whereas I knew very well anytime in me as a nurse trying to make a change in the operating room, tons of pushback.
You're not telling the surgeon what to do, are you? Like, we don't do that in the OR.
No, anytime, having that group idea where it's a shared idea really does help to make that change, because suddenly, it's not just a nurse telling a surgeon what to do, but suddenly it's their organization who's on board. Can we go back, though, and talk about the state of surgery before a timeout was officially implemented as a requirement? What was going on?
Well, I would just say it was pretty much what was going on now, with the exception of the fact that, we have to also remember the time. So this was the time when I said when I went to go to law school, everybody was going to get their MBA. It was all about DRGs and being more efficient and controlling costs, until like turnover time was a huge thing. Oh. The thing wasn't, the thing that most people, still, but I mean, that's really, it was in its rabid stage, oh my God, you got to get the patient in and out. You need, the antiseptic that we use to disinfect the room it took, supposed to take 10 minutes to dry, and they were bringing people in 30 seconds after they, laying people on these wet sheets that they put up.
The chloroprep argument.
Yeah. So, it was this whole thing about time. And so because it was so focused on efficiencies, it was about getting the patient in the room, getting prep. And there was this kind of trust in the system, that the processes were going to work. And, if you know the definition of Six Sigma, it is, one mistake in a million is, that's the efficiency. Well, we might have been having 3 or 4 mistakes in a million, but it's to those patients who we did the wrong surgery on that was devastating. It was devastating to the healthcare providers who participated in that. So I'm a big fan of understanding the second victim syndrome, because I don't believe any nurse goes into the hospital with the idea of they're going to hurt somebody, or any surgical tech, or any doctor, So they are harmed by that as well. And so the fact is there was this mental push about being more efficient and controlling cost, that the safety and the quality kind of not intentionally, but was not the focus on people's minds. Focus was meeting their turnover time targets and getting these things. So stopping and making sure that we're doing the right person at the right time, was a culture change to put that back in, to kind of push back a little bit and say, hey, we might have gone too far in the efficiencies. Let's come back up.
Have you ever heard that term, like when people say that when everybody thinks it's everyone's job, no one's actually doing it, because you always think, well, somebody else did this checkoff, or someone else, read the consent, someone else made sure the right site was marked. I mean, you have all of those things that I think we have to assign responsibility, and that has to go to our operative team. And it takes, the surge tech, don't you touch that scalpel until the timeout is done. And, the nurse has to read the consent, and then anesthesia has to agree. Like, all of these people, it then forces personal responsibility for ensuring that patient's being advocated for.
Yeah, I call it the problem of expertise. Because, so I give this example in my talk. My daughter was 17, 18 years old, driving me to the airport. And we're driving down I-94 to O'Hare, and I kind of look over, and she is steering the steering wheel with her inside of her legs as she's adjusting the phone and doing something with the radio. And I'm like, hey, what are you doing? And she's like, relax, Dad, I have this, of course, a car accident months later, but she went from this, young lady gripping the steering wheel when she first started driving to thinking she could steer this 4,000-pound vehicle 70 miles an hour, down a highway with her legs, because she mastered it, right?
Right.
You see all the time people walking into traffic and getting killed because they mastered walking and looking at their phones. They think. We thought we mastered the surgical process. Like you said, there's somebody else, so many players, so many things doing. There's no way that were going to do lung surgery. And so every single time I was in a root cause analysis, people were shocked that the wrong site surgery was done. How this never happened? How did this? Because never people believed that it wouldn't happen, so they stopped looking for it.
Or that it wouldn't happen to them.
Right.
Yeah, it's not going to happen to my patient. It wouldn't happen to my OR. We're so territorial that we think that it won't until it does. And as you said, that's a very scary place for the whole team and the patient to be. I have a question about variations. So we go to different facilities, different states, around the country, and you go in and their timeout materials, their sheet or their processes are still a little different. Some go into a lot of detail and some don't. Are you all a part of that process as the timeout has evolved over the years?
No, we have the standard process. We still have the toolkit, but I'm not. And again, I'm outside. I'm no longer president, and there's the ARN is ARN in the board, but we're not. We don't have. We're there as a support organizational things. We don't have commandments. We have recommended practices. So we're trying to recommend to folks to do the thing because we understand there are maybe situations in various states or various organizations or whatever where you may need to tweak it. And then, again, you don't want to set a standard where you're setting people up to be held accountable for something because you said, oh, this is a rule that you have to do. ARN says it. And then, of course, that would be used as evidence and, trust stuff. So you give people an opportunity to adjust. And so I always say when I was a vice president of perioperative services or CNO, you should have very few policies, but a lot of procedures. Because procedures are guidelines. You could say, this is what we're supposed to do. Policies are the way it's supposed to be every single time. And so we're giving people a procedure to follow, and then they can adjust it for the type of patients that they're dealing with or the type of situations that they're dealing with. And so I'm not so worried about the adjustments as long as they stay true to the core message of the time.
Yeah. And that core, you see that in Universal Protocol. You see that from the Joint Commission from AORN that we have a correct patient identity, we have a correct site, and an agreement on the procedure to be done. And
the implants and the equipment.
And implants, those things are
cool.
available.
When we started, we didn't have that part, So it evolved as we got, this is a problem as well. Let's add it into that.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you.
No, absolutely. You're right, because that did get added. And I think that's also how we end up with variations in our timeout, because other things might have happened at other facilities and they want to make sure it gets included. Or we now include fire risk in our timeout a lot of places because that is something else that we need to discuss. So we have definitely seen the timeout evolve, but it's also a standard. It is something that we do or should be doing without fail. And everybody recognizes that this pause is important because we need to make sure we are taking care of our patients. And it goes back to advocating for that.
Yeah, and it's not just the standard in the United States, it's standard around the world.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. I don't remember the exact statistic, but the World Health Organization actually has a statistic that looks at how wrong site surgery decreased after the implementation of the timeout. And it's astronomical. It is incredible to me that something that we almost think it's so simple, just stop and just make sure you're doing the right thing before you do it. And yet, it took massive work to make people make that change of practice. But then when it got changed, we made a massive difference in the lives of our patients.
Yeah. And and isn't that why we became nurses and surgical techs, the healthcare providers, is that, none of us, I think, went into it with the idea of making ourselves rich. We wanted to obviously provide for our families,
right.
But most of us have gone into it to say, my time on earth, I want to spend making things better. And that's where advocacy can be. You can even make impact on hundreds of lives, depending on how well you get involved in how setting up the right policies and protocols, as well as doing clinical care.
So as an educator, part of, I think, my job, not just teaching my students sterile technique, but also teaching them how to advocate when they don't see something that is correct or they question something. I think that, yes, we're pretty good at everyone listening to the consent and participating in the timeout. But what is your advice for or how do you teach your students when you see something that you question, that you're not even 100% sure of? How do you teach them to find that voice, to advocate, to double check against what you think or what might be presumed?
Yeah, I'm going to try to dummy down this answer in the sense of trying to make it less complicated, but it is a complicated answer. So
it is.
So I'm a big believer of the theory of genderlicht, which is a theory by a linguist out of Georgetown, Dr. Deborah Tannen, who spoke about how we have dialects in the English language. And those dialects are kind of based in gender. And so, and again, she's saying, not saying all men are one way and all women are the other. She's just kind of saying it's based in that way. And so the typical male gender dialect is called report. And that's where, the typical, things according to this linguist. I'm not saying this is Bill Duffy's thing. I'm just saying,
I'm hearing Tim Allen in my head, Yeah,
I don't want to, 1,000, you get 1,000 letters about this. But anyway, what she's saying is that men, want to be, their goal in a conversation is to improve the report speakers, both men and women report speakers. Their goal is to improve their standing in a group. So many times they won't make any things to make them look like they don't know what they're doing. And they won't ask for directions. They won't do things. And if someone said something that sounds like a question, they will think that they could come in and give an answer to it. Even if the other person isn't really asking a question, they're just kind of making a statement that sounds like that. In the reverse sense, the rapport speakers, the other dialect, which is men and women, but much more women in this time, will not try to advance in a conversation, but will try to keep things equal and balanced. So they won't necessarily tell someone what to do, but they're saying, hey, this is what I do, So I talk to my nurses who I teach. You have to read the person that you're talking to and then talk to them in a dialect that they can understand. So, a lot of times I would say if I want a physician to do something and a report speaker, I would say to him, I know you know all about this. Isn't this the way to do this? Saying the way that I want him to do it, but making him think it's his idea or her idea. Whatever.
You do all the secrets right
now. For a rapport speaker, I would say, hey, let's do this. Let's figure out a way. If we can do this, don't you think we can do this together? So you have to kind of phrase your discussion with them, because if you try to tell somebody who's a report speaker what to do, they're going to view that as a threat to their status in the group. And so they're naturally going to resist the idea. And so a lot of times I hear nurses get frustrated about homework, and I'm like, it's not because they're not valuing your intelligence. It's the way you're saying it to them that they just internally cannot hear it. And so you have to be able, if you want to make sure you get your message across, you have to say it in a way that they can understand. And that's really, you can go on for another hour about this, but that's kind of the overview. We have to be smart. So when you're an advocate, you can't advocate to someone who say maybe Spanish speaking in English. You got to be able to communicate them in a way they can understand it. So the same thing is when you're advocating to someone you want to get change, you have to be able to talk to them in a way that it makes sense and they can hear.
Yeah, you have to know your audience, and then you have to be able to communicate what you need in a way that your audience will understand and internalize.
Right, and too many people just choose to communicate in their own language and not think about who they're talking.
And unfortunately, you can't text, hey, I think you're contaminating, or I think we're operating on the wrong leg. That's the language many of our students understand nowadays, and verbalize it under pressure. I think that's a hard skill to teach, but so important and critical to doing it.
Well, and I think that's why the airline training, safety training is, the team steps and being able to say, I'm concerned, and then other people in the team then have to hear that too. So the person isn't just the only one speaking up. So if I had one of my team members saying I'm concerned, I'm like, wait a sec, we have a concern here. Let's hear what, so that it's not just alone, because too many times we let our colleague hang out there
Yeah.
by themselves. And we need to be able to show there's always, if you want to get a politician to do something, you get numbers. So if you want to get change in that, you got to get numbers, which is why we got all the coalition together.
Right. So one thing, we're coming to the end of this conversation already, and these conversations go by much faster than I would ever like for them to. But one thing that you and I talked about prior to this interview when we chatted ahead of time, you talked about us owning our practice environment and that kind of playing into advocacy. Will you talk about that a little bit before we finish up?
Yeah, well, I think, when I listen to nurses, or and again, I'm sorry, Chris, surgical technologists, I'm just speaking from my the actual things, well, no, just who I am. So, I don't want to try to put it on anybody else. But when I think of nurses who say we have no power, that just drives me nuts because, as I was telling my nursing students last semester, there's, 13 million people in the state of Illinois, and there's like 50,000 nurses. So, you like 1 or 2% of the population of the state has a license to do what you get to do. And the only reason you don't have power is because you give your power away. People were saying there's no way anybody's going to listen to us. Well, no, we changed the way surgery is done. Nurses are the number one respected profession. And so we have to start thinking that we own our practice, that is our license, and that wherever we work, we're working in an environment that it is our tool workshop, if you will, just like surgeons come into a hospital and use it. We're bringing our license into that workshop, and we are partnering with that organization to do. But so if you don't like the environment, get on a committee. Sit down and do it. You can change by having a voice on the committee. Build a coalition of nurses at the committee. You don't like the way staffing is done? Get with the group, get on the committee, and work with the team to do this. Don't just sit back there and say, no one listens to me. Because a long time ago, my dad used to say, power perceived is power achieved. If people think you have power, they will give you power. If you project you have no power, no one's going to give you the time of day.
Well, it's not even, I think, isolated to the field of nursing. I think that's a huge fight that we are trying to fight in the field of surgical technology is feeling like, you are an advocate. You do have a very important role. And, this is a profession and one that is vital to the care. So, you do have a say in how that patient's cared for. And being able to do that on a global scale, I think, is a challenge, not just for nursing, but, for my profession too. And we always said, I was taught, fake it till you make it. You might not feel confident, but if you portray that confidence, it grows. And so, yeah, I think that's kind of how you do that in the operating room, even as a nurse or when you're making change in any organization, right?
Yeah, definitely.
But I would say the number one thing is build coalitions. Mm-hmm. To want to make change.
Yeah, build groups, get people together because collectively you have a larger, stronger voice. Yeah. All right.
One person is easy to turn down.
Yeah, Bill, this has been fantastic. Before we go, do you have any final advice to anyone listening to the show that wants to find their voice or wants to advocate for change?
Yeah, so believe that you have, the power. That I think the most important gift that we have as nurses with our license is the power to advocate. We're the only profession that walks around the hospital that says we're the patient advocate. So we need to be able to advocate both in our clinical care, but also in setting up the policies and the procedures and the environments that we're going to practice in. And by being involved in that, we can help. Everybody talks about the disruption in healthcare right now. Well, we're the ones who can fix it. We're the number one healthcare provider. And so build coalitions, get a vision of what you want to do, sell the idea to people, and you'll see the change that can happen.
That is awesome, Bill. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and your expertise with us today. I really appreciate it.
Sure. And no problem. And if you ever want to do a talk about how to manage the risk and from a malpractice standpoint, I'd be happy to chat with you about that.
Absolutely.
Great stories that come down that line.
And that was Bill Duffy sharing his experience and telling his story about how he advocated for change, how he worked with the team at AORN and with the members of AORN to institute a timeout, and how he really brought other organizations into that and made it a group idea that affected change and actually made things better, made surgery better for our patients. And, Chris, what really stuck out to me was that part of having that coalition that he said, having a group, not feeling powerless, but actually projecting that power or projecting that confidence that you want people to perceive about you, and having that voice, that unified voice with a group of people to make change happen.
Well, and, the timeout has been implemented and mandated for so long that, many of us don't even remember a time or can't imagine a time without it. But the same issues that they had then, I feel, are very real in our present day. And that need for a coalition, he spoke so often about the nursing and coming together to advocate. And it made me think, gosh, it takes a team to work on the patient in the operating room, and it would be wonderful. I think there's a huge screaming need for us to form a coalition between surgical technologists and nurses. And because, we are a huge part of the team working on the patient, we have to work and be a well-oiled machine. And so can you imagine how much we would get done if both of those organizations work together to be able to improve surgery in general, and how much safer our patients would be? It got me excited.
Absolutely. Our voice, our collective voice, is louder than any one voice, but it definitely starts with one person. Somebody saying, hey, this can change. We can do this. And then collectively bringing about that change. And the season's only going to keep getting better from here. So
we are very excited for
But that is going to do it for this week's episode of First Case. On behalf of Chris and myself, thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of First Case. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to First Case on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for First Case in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@firstcasemedia.com. We look forward to hearing from you.